Hello, my name is Claudia Cunha, and my latest album is called Duo. And I'm so happy to invite you to listen to USModernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Today we're launching the first in a series of recorded panel discussions from live modernism events around the country. An exhibition last fall on late architect Myron Goldfinger opened at the New Canaan Museum in lovely New Canaan, Connecticut. USModernist was there moderating the panel's remembrances. Circle, Square, Triangle, the Architecture of Myron Goldfinger closed at the end of 2023, but will be touring other locations in 2024. Don't miss it. Later on, our musical guest will be the lovely Lucy Wijnands. And now, from a street corner underneath a neon sign with a martini glass, here's your dealer, the Huggy Bear of modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. As I've long said, the Eames lounge chair and ottoman, which you must always say as a phrase, is the gateway drug to modernism, a portal to a world of glass walls, cantilevered roofs, and built-in everything. The plunge into this delicious and well-appointed abyss, how's that for mixing metaphors, will all start innocently enough. You will occasionally speak with a Danish accent. You will gasp over a well-done lack of ornament in a house, and you have an unhealthy fetish for teak. Then one day, you'll lose your modernist virginity. You'll sit, for the first time, in an Eames lounge chair and ottoman, in its buttery leather and walnut embrace, with your feet properly pampered at the exact right level, in relation to your properly cushioned hoo-ha, and the Eames lounge chair and ottoman whispers about future evenings with friends bathed in the warm glow of George Nelson lamps and Noguchi tables. You will be smitten, and soon you will be scouring vintage stores and eBay and even Craigslist to get one. Your house or apartment, once a bohemian mess of mismatched prints and overstuffed sofas and discontinued IKEA chairs, deserves an upgrade, right? And while there are deals out there, getting this gateway drug ain't cheap. So you'll be planning how many dinners at Olive Garden you're not going to have, and how many lunches you can stand of shrimp and garlic-flavored ramen. Your therapist, a kind soul who apparently loves macrame, will diagnose you with AMS, Advanced Modernist Syndrome, which your insurance company will not cover, and you're only too glad to ignore their treatment plan of forced exposure to Victorian doilies, Roman columns, and Better Homes and Gardens. Then, one Tuesday at 2 a.m. when you should be sleeping, you'll find an Eames lounge chair and ottoman online. The beautifully choreographed photo shows it set against a kitchen that could star in a Braun commercial. It is perfect, except for the price tag, a number so astronomical it could launch a SpaceX rocket. But undeterred, you'll sell your unboxed Star Wars figurines, and you'll pillage your small but well-timed inheritance from that slightly racist uncle with anger issues. The Eames lounge chair and ottoman and catalyst for your madness will find its rightful place in the living room, and you will sit, martini in hand, listening to Diana Krall singing Temptation. You have begun the journey to the modernist house of your dreams. Just remember, the ramen phase is temporary. The vintage cred, however, is eternal. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of the traveling exhibition Circle, Square, Triangle, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Myron Goldfinger's signature modernist houses of the Hamptons and Westchester, New York, include the wild party house featured in the film The Wolf of Wall Street. A favorite architect of New York City's rich and powerful during the 1980s, Myron died in the summer of 2023 at the age of 90. Talking about Myron Goldfinger's legacy are his wife and partner, designer June Goldfinger, Laura Blau, who has lived in a Goldfinger house for 50 years, legendary architectural photographer Norman McGrath, architects John Field and Joeb Moore, who worked with Myron, and designer and Hamptons preservationist Timothy Godbold. George Smart moderated this discussion, recorded at the new Canaan Museum in the epicenter of Connecticut Modernism, New Canaan, Connecticut. The event was Circle Square Triangle, the architecture of Myron Goldfinger.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is George Smart with USModernist, and it's my honor today to moderate today's panel about the architect Myron Goldfinger, who passed away this summer. First, however, I want to answer the question that many of you have wondered about on your way here. Myron Goldfinger is not connected to the James Bond movie of the same name. However, the movie Goldfinger does have a connection to another modernist architect, Hungarian Erno Goldfinger, no relation. James Bond's creator, Ian Fleming, was so mad at Erno for bulldozing Victorian classical homes to put up modernist houses, so he named the movie's villain Goldfinger. Erno sued Ian Fleming, and they settled out of court. Ian Fleming got to keep the Goldfinger name in the book, Erno got paid off, and Fleming later threatened to rename the book Goldprick. Our Myron Goldfinger grew up in Atlantic City before the casinos came. He was inspired by the houses in the Marvin Gardens neighborhood and went on to graduate from the University of Pennsylvania in 1955, studying under Lou Kahn. He served in the Army and in 1957 moved to New York, where his neighbor was actress Veronica Lake. When he went on a walkabout to Europe in 1958, architect Richard Meyer subleased his apartment, destroyed 2 lamps, and never paid him back. Myron worked for Skidmore, Owens & Merrill, which he hated because it was such a large corporate office. Philip Johnson in the Seagram building, which he loved, plus he taught at Pratt for 11 years. In 1966, he went on his own, married designer June Makovic, and together they did remodels around New York out of an I.M. Pei apartment in Kips Bay Towers. Myron was the author of 4 books, all of which you can download at USModernist.org. And we also have some copies to give away to you in the back you can take with you. My first encounter with Myron's work was in a magazine, and my first impression was, wow, who is this guy? That led to a phone call with a skeptical Myron and June wondering why this dude from North Carolina was so interested in their wildly geometric houses. A few weeks later, together we documented all of Myron's residential work, but it was not until this past summer that I got to meet him and June at their amazing house in Wacabuck, a house like no other house in the world. The experience of meeting Myron was just like the magazine, just wow. And today, we'll hear from 6 people who lived, worked, loved, disagreed with, and admired Myron. Laura Blau, from left to right, Norman McGrath, Joeb Moore, John Field, Timothy Godbold, and June Goldfinger. Let's give them a big round of applause. Laura Blau in 1971 was 24 years old, married with a young son, and just completed graduate school at Columbia. If you're doing the math, that means she's only 40 now.
In spirit.
She was ready to move out of the city into a larger space, and like most non-architects like me, she purchased a magazine for ideas. Lucky for her, that House and Garden magazine featured Myron and June's award-winning house in Wacabuck, and she was transfixed. She met Myron, and they had an instant bond. She recognized his genius, and he knew she appreciated the power of what he created. And she's lived there for over 50 years. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. I would just like to say that Myron would be so thrilled that all of you are here today honoring him. And as someone who has known him for over 50 years, he deserves it. Would you like to know how I met him?
Sure, that's a great question.
Okay. Again, this is going back a long time, 1971. You would call an operator and there would be a person on the phone and they would give you a telephone number. And I did. I called his number, and it was the studio in Kips Bay that still is there today. And they gave me his number in Walkabuck, and I called, and we spoke for about 10 minutes, and he immediately said, "You need to come up on Saturday." This was a Thursday. It's very specific. "You need to come up with your son and your husband." And actually, Myron and June's oldest daughter is exactly the same age as my son. And Joeb was a baby, really, when we went up. And I walked into the house, and I turned and said, "He's going to build a house for us." I was 24 years old, and I knew I was making the right decision.
Thank you. Photographer Norman McGrath is the son of Australian architect Raymond McGrath. He graduated from Trinity College Dublin as a structural engineer and switched into architectural photography during the 1960s. Ever since, he's been one of the most widely published architecture photographers, with over 60 magazine and book covers. Acclaimed by the AIA, Cooper Union, and Yale, among many others, his book, Photographing Buildings Inside and Out, sold over 47,000 copies and is still used instructively. Norman taught photography at ICP, the Palm Beach Photo Workshops, and the Maine Photographic Workshops, and his archive was purchased by the Library of Congress in 2013. As you can tell, Norman is a young man with a bright future, and he remains very active. He's photographed many of Myron's houses, and Myron also designed his house, which he lived in for decades. Welcome, Norman.
Thank you. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see such a great crowd here, considering the weather. And it's a tribute to Myron and to the Historical Society and George Smart and everybody that you're all here. In any event, I should like to mention how it was that I came to know Myron first, and that was as a result of getting an assignment from House and Garden, I think it was, to photograph the Kips Bay apartment. That was where June and Myron lived in the very early years. So I go back a long way with them because we immediately hit it off, and Myron and June have been close friends ever since that time.
So let me ask you a question there, Norman. Why did Myron, who was a talented photographer, not shoot his own work?
Well, as anybody here in the audience who has looked at or examined Myron's books, he was, in fact, quite a talented photographer. But architectural photography is a very specific area of photography, and it requires not only photographic expertise, but having the right equipment. And by that, I mean, at least in the film era, a 4x5 view camera. You use a camera like that because it has all the control that an architectural photographer desires. Why such a tool? Well, a tool like that enables you to produce photographs of tall buildings that don't look like they're falling over backwards, and you have more control over the image than you would with any other tool. Myron, for example, for much of his work, his play too, he used a 35mm camera, which you're all familiar with, and that's a very different tool to use than a 4x5 view camera. 4x5 view camera must be used on a tripod. It's anything but automatic. You have to consciously do virtually everything with it. Combined with the fact that the image is upside down, that gives you a little bit of a feel for the challenge of architectural photography. Architectural photography, in particular, everybody has their own views about how a building should look. If it doesn't look right, then it's probably not a very good photograph.
Thank you, Norman. Our next panelist is Joeb Moore, principal of his own architecture firm in Greenwich, with designs winning over 60 national, regional, and state awards. He is an adjunct professor at Barnard Columbia and teaches graduate studios at Yale, with research interests in aesthetics, landscape, history, and culture. And like rock stars getting their face on the cover of the Rolling Stone, his house was on the cover of Architectural Records 2023 Record Houses, a rare honor. Welcome, Joeb.
Thank you for the invite. So my first encounter with Myron Goldfinger is really not about his family, his life. It's really about his work. I grew up in Wacabuck. I grew up on a road called Perch Bay Road along the lake, which is adjacent and abutted to Terrybit Road. So I would go on these walkabouts as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, and I would encounter these shocking, primitive, geometric, very elegant and simple, but provocative kinds of ideas about a home. And I was struck by this as a young man. And it led me to, even at that young age, start thinking about design and architecture. And those encounters really has been now a lifelong journey into this idea of architecture in the expanded field between landscape, art, and architecture. And I think Myron's work was a major contributor to that kind of discovery and that process, which is learning through experience, going out into the world, discovering new ways about thinking about living, new ways of understanding a home, a place, a dwelling. And for that, I thank him and June, wherever she is down there. Yeah.
John Field is an architect in New York City whose firm Building Studio Architects serves a wide range of clients. In the early 80s, he answered a classified ad, you might remember those, looking for an internship, and Myron became his mentor. After completing school, John rejoined Myron in Soho, working through the 90s. Always valuing the experience and many lessons learned, he was often the yin to Myron's yang. John continued collaborating with Myron as a colleague and served as a board member of Cove Castles, while his own practice developed over the ensuing decades. Welcome, John.
Hi. Experience is a good way to start this because my experience in architecture was with Myron. He taught me what architecture was. I wasn't a student when I applied for an internship. I was actually a Columbia dropout. And working with him in his office became the inspiration for me to go to architecture school and continue my path in the profession. So for that, I thank him.
So, John, how did Myron see the work of other modernist architects?
Myron is fantastic about his view of others, and other architects especially. There was a cadre of modernists, including some of the New York Five, who he knew quite well. Richard Meyer, for example. I had heard the story it was about a linen suit, not lamps. But perhaps it was both. Richard, I think, took his linen suit for an interview. Be that as it may, some thought Myron was stuck in time with his perfect geometries. Myron felt others had progressed through perfection in their development of their styles and changing with the whims of the marketplace. So he thought very highly of some works and not so highly of other works, to be as polite as I can.
All right. Thank you. Tim Godbold grew up in Australia and was inspired by David Bowie's important message of be original. And he is. Whether it's at the forefront of his field of interior design or writing a book about the sartorial influence of military uniforms, Tim creates luxurious interiors in a signature style, working on historical renovations to new buildings. He has been featured in a dozen leading design publications, and he's created the fast-growing nonprofit preservation group, Hamptons 20th Century Modern, to preserve and raise awareness on modernist houses and their architectural significance. His group has a wonderful house tour every summer that's already on my calendar for 2024. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, George. How are you?
Good.
It's great to be here and great to be sitting next to this lovely lady and to see so many of you from Myron's wake a few months ago. You know, I feel like I'm the token person because I kind of came late to the party for Myron. I only really discovered Myron in 2020, but I quickly discovered that I was completely fascinated with this architect and his aesthetic, which was completely pure and original, like David Bowie. I mean, that's very much who I am. Like, I've always been taught you have to be original. Like, be original. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Go and be original. And I see a lot of that in Myron's work. I'm really trying to push as much as I can on getting Myron's name out there. Because I'll just briefly say, I was at a talk 2 weeks ago in the Hamptons, and it was by Alistair Gordon. It was an incredible talk. It was about Pierre Chareau, who, I don't know if you know, built the Motherwell House out in the Hamptons and is buried out in the Bouvier plot. I mean, there's this incredible history of modernist architecture in the Hamptons. But, you know, I was sitting in a room full of people, and I was the youngest person there, and I'm 55. So, like, it's really important. I mean, we all love it. There's some young people here today, which is great. But for me, it's really about getting the next generation of people to discover the work of Myron's and other important architects from the 20th century before they all get torn down. And so I'm doing whatever I can to get the word out there because it's really important. And a lot of young architects, I mean, I had a conversation with Paul Goldberger 2 weeks ago, and he's like, they're not interested. You know, the young architects aren't really interested in what happened 50 years ago or 60 years ago. So it's like, how can we get these people interested? And a lot of that comes from social media. And that's sort of what I've been pummeling our site with is images of Myron's work. Because the minute they see it, they're all like, this is incredible. Wow, who is this person? So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
June Goldfinger grew up the daughter of a gallery owner and a shipping owner who encouraged the full expression of her considerable artistic skills. With that encouragement, June led her own atelier for decades, designing and manufacturing product lines in 17 countries. Her most enthusiastic patron was Myron, followed by Ralph Lauren, Martha Stewart, and Heather Previn. June and Myron trusted each other's talents explicitly. She designed the interiors for most of Myron's houses, and Myron never saw those designs until they were installed, upon which he was her most approving fan. She was the producer behind their published work, including 4 books and multiple magazine features that you'll see in the exhibition. Her parents were also clients, commissioning Myron and June to create their house on the beach in Sands Point. In his own words, from the book Myron Goldfinger Architect, June has been my best critic and supporter through the years and complimented my architecture with her superb taste and creative spirit. Welcome, June.
Hello, George. Number one, I'd like to thank, and I think everybody knows who they are, who have been so supportive of Myron over the years, and he's not here to thank you himself. So I will. And that's really important because everybody comes with a very special kind contribution to Myron's legacy. And I could not be, and our 2 daughters, Thea and Joeb, could not be more appreciative in every way. So big thank you. That's really the message.
Tell us, how did the 2 of you meet, June? Was it like the 1940 movie The Philadelphia Story, where you are Katharine Hepburn engaged to another man, and then suddenly Cary Grant comes on the scene?
Actually, yes.
I knew this.
Yeah.
On their homework.
Yeah. Oh, George knows everything about all of us. Don't worry.
Tell us the story, June.
I was supposed to be with so-and-so the 4th next to the DuPonts to have a nice little horse farm. And I knew of Myron's work, and then I met him through artsy friends. And that was it. It was like, you're mine. No question about it. And so 58 years later, we're all here talking about him, which is, so divine.
That's lovely. Thank you. All right. Let's go back to Laura. Laura, Myron was not just your architect. He did a lot of other things on the project as well. What were those?
Myron was the complete architect. That meant inside and outside. Being the 4th house he ever built, I had the luxury of having him as my general contractor, which I think is a very unique thing. And when he would come and examine the work being done, everyone thought it would be very simple because it was a small, simple home, but there were no baseboards. There's nothing to hide any mistakes. So Myron would come in and he'd be measuring things and making sure that everything was perfect. As well as the inside, from the inception, when he saw the rocks where he decided how he would place the house, because Myron definitely was a man who understood nature. And it was a very important part of his design. And while they were simultaneously building the house, he had people creating, because actually my house is built on an old Wells Fargo trail, and I'm in the middle of rocks, between rocks and the side of a mountain, and George was there this morning and he can attest to this. We did not need to use any dynamite, and you hear that all the time when they have to do that. We did not. He designed the house so it would sit facing the rocks and be nestled into the mountain, which is why even when there is a bad storm or we've had some slight earthquakes, I sleep through them because I don't even feel the house moving. That's how strong this house is. He created from walls that were on the property, so I didn't have to buy all the stones. He had these 2 young boys build all of these pathways and terraces that are natural out there. So he was an inside-outside man, and that, of course, is, in my opinion, the best of an architect, because he knew, and Norman, incidentally, was there documenting the house almost from the time that they put a shovel down. So I was very blessed to have Myron not only as the designer of my home, but actually as the person who made it. It was built in a way that it wouldn't have been built if he hadn't been in charge. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Norman, you've worked with so many architects. Of all the architects you could have chosen, why did you choose Myron to design your house?
That's a very interesting question, because some architects, when they design houses for themselves, want these houses to incorporate all the ideas which would appeal to potential clients. But I think Myron had a somewhat different idea when he built his own house, and it really followed the dictates of his creative genius, that it took the shape that it did. However, having photographed the house in great detail, I had so many misgivings about the house from the standpoint of owning or living in it that I hesitated for a very long time before, in fact, selecting Myron as my architect. And in conjunction with my wife, we eventually came to the conclusion that if we gave Myron a significant enough brief and telling him all the aspects of his architecture that we liked, and also enumerating the ones that we didn't like, that he was sufficiently talented that he would come up with a good design. Well, he came up with a brilliant design. It took him quite a bit of ingenuity because we didn't have a lot of money. We wanted a house that had 3 bedrooms and, if possible, a guest room. We wanted to have a living room that maybe had a sunken pit in the middle. We loved triangles and we loved curves, obviously. We had, as it turned out, a very beautiful site, very wooded site. And when Myron came to visit this site, he went right down to one extreme corner of it where there was a beautiful outcrop of rocks. And he said, "This is where the house has to be." Well, it did mean that we had a very, very long driveway. We had a 2,000-foot long driveway. But I'm so glad that he insisted that that's where the house be, because the house was completely protected. It was built on a rocky ledge, not as rocky as his own house had been, but nevertheless rocky enough. But we had a nice little flat plateau around the house, and it was completely wooded. Very, very private. You couldn't see it from anywhere else. Our nearest neighbor was a house that was at least 600 feet away, and even in the wintertime, you could barely see it. So it was very private. We had, in fact, 9 acres of land. Interestingly enough, my wife and I reluctantly sold the house early last year because at my advanced age, the upkeep of the house had become a little bit onerous, and I didn't want to be faced with a situation where I would suddenly be compromised and not able to look after the house, and so we reluctantly sold it. But we sold it to a pair of young architects, Michael Unsicker and his wife, Magda. She's also an architect of Polish background, and they have done an absolutely superb job of renovating the house, installing a new updated heating system. automatic roller blinds and so on. And the house has never really looked better. They both replaced many of the built-in furniture that was Formica and that was very much the sort of signature of the house, but he's used the same forms, and it is now made of beautiful wood. So I approve of everything that has happened to it, and I'm hoping to be able to document it and so that everybody can see what a beautiful job has been done to it.
Thank you, Norman. Joeb, how did Myron's work inspire you in architecture?
I kind of segue over from this reference to the triangle and the use of geometric primitives and basic forms, if you think of some of the underlining kind of foundational design principles that emerge out of the Bauhaus, but then lead into the New York School and the Harvard Five in the kind of post-war modernist ilk that you all know as the Harvard Five here. For me, what I have taken away, not just from Myron, but in general from this culture, is a set of an economy of moves, design based around a principled approach to design. And so when I look at Myron's work, and I think back now, my gosh, 40 years, and I think, how did this happen, or the influence? So if I was actually to put up some of my recent work, you would be quite surprised how much it relates to some of the basic geometry and organization that was at the heart of what Myron was thinking about. So this idea of one material, very simple. So I have a golden rule, 3 materials and you're done. So take that in for a little bit. But also this idea of restraint and modesty, that there's a kind of quiet, simple elegance to how it's situated in its site and in relation to its program. The other important principle that emerges from Myron's work when you read about his work and his thinking, you begin to understand his commitment and his awareness of these Mediterranean villages and cities where it was not just about the individual house or unit, but this idea that there was this communal housing, this communal living in which you could read the form of the entire village. But at the same time, the streets and the squares and the paths created these negative spaces that created these shadow spaces, or these kinds of contrasts between light and shadow that will become so important to his own work, and for very different reasons in my own work. And this was all from his early years at Penn under Lou Kahn, and thinking about Lou Kahn's ideas about silence and light in his work. One of those walkabouts that I was telling you about was when I suddenly came across, up on Chapel Road, Myron and June's own house, which many of you saw the model upstairs, but this was quite an anomaly and quite a strange trapezoidal form standing up in the trees. It was a tree house, and you would pass by the woods. It's done in a wood vertical siding, cedar, I'm assuming. That cedar siding echoes the trees and the tall woodlands that are immediately in that area. And just you can imagine as a 15-year-old being struck and stuck, like, this is a house that has these negative porch spaces that look down, to the point that New York Magazine creates a little cartoon spoof about the mailman trying to deliver the mail. June is looking down from above like, what? That innovation, that brilliance, that kind of recognition that architecture transforms us when it moves us beyond the conventional, the normative, and makes us rethink how we might experience and live in space. I take it that Harvard Five took this as a mantra of their work here in New Canaan, but I also think the New York School, Myron himself took this on. The second tier of that point, or the third principle, so first principle, restraint, economy of moves, limit your material palette, limit your formal palette, so that there's a strong form, a strong statement that can be read. The third term would be about roofs, flat roofs and pitch roofs. So the other thing we all pick up on Myron's works is a sculpture, what we call the sculptural quality about it. But this kind of reinvention and rethinking of the early modernists, merging of the flat roof technologies of the Industrial Revolution and the warehouses and factory. And then these reemergence in the kind of post-war area about actually roof forms that he's, I'm sure, being influenced by the Mediterranean, Caribbean, and his travels that took hold for me. So you will see that I often am working with these transitional roof forms that can be stretched and exaggerated, but you would still recognize them in your own community and neighborhood.
All right, thank you, Joeb. John, Myron had a very particular signature style, if you look at his houses particularly. How did he meet the client's needs? How was it working with the clients and that style?
Often difficult. This vision Myron had, this view of space, the view of his house and how the house was viewed, is something that he was uncompromising about, often to the point where he would refuse to add windows. He would refuse to redirect views because they compromised what others would see, the exterior volume of this house, and at the same time they would also compromise the interior space. So it was difficult. He did compromise, small compromises, little battles, maybe slightly more closet space, but it was triangular. So would you put things in a triangular closet? Not sure. Residual space often became the additional closet space that was so needed. Or comments like, no, your clothes are terrible. Why don't you get rid of them? And one of the things I learned from Myron was how to listen. Because it wasn't only listening to clients, it was listening to Myron, it was figuring out how to navigate often opposites, one of the things we have to do in our profession.
All right, thank you. Tim, you're looking ahead to the future. You're working to preserve Myron's Schulman house. Tell us about that.
Sure. So before I jump into that, I just want to say it makes me really happy when I hear Norman's story about how he sold his house and someone's bought it and they brought it back. Like, that makes me super, super happy. And just another note, I'm working a lot of projects in Miami at the moment, and trying to get people to use 3 things for a palette for a house would be near impossible. But I completely understand that philosophy of limiting your palette, and that could definitely be used in a lot of places outside of Myron's work. But to answer your question, the Schulman house, I don't know if you've all seen it upstairs or if you know it, has this fascinating history. And in fact, we've approached Vanity Fair to write a story about it because it's amazing to see, because it's completely falling apart. I don't know, if you go on Hamptons 20th Century Modern on Instagram, you will see a number of images taken by, I think his name's Ben Erickson, and he is a very talented furniture designer. He's in the New York Times a lot. His work's extremely impressive. He lives near the house. He's completely fascinated by it. A lot of people are really fascinated by this Schulman house. It's the cover of Myron's book. I mean, it's an incredible piece of architecture, and it's in ruins. I mean, you've never seen a house so in ruins as it is now. Ben's been taking these beautiful images of this house decaying over the past 4 years. You know, the roof fell in, there's raccoons and animals living in it. You know, the first owner went to jail for tax evasion, and then the next people that bought it, he went to prison for art fraud, and then after he this is why this story is going to Vanity Fair. I mean, it's just like, it's a story and a half. You know, no one's lived in it for like 8 years, and I came across it literally shortly after I met Myron. It was like really this whole like kismet moment. I think I just met Myron and I got home and these images came up of Schulman House. So anyway, it's in New Jersey. It's like 3.5 hours from my house. I drove there and went to the wrong street in a different part of New Jersey, but I made it there. And surprisingly enough, there's a new owner. And, you know, you would think he'd tear this house down because it's in such bad condition, but he's rebuilding it. He's actually going to rebuild it, and he's put a new roof on it. He loves it. He thinks it's incredible, and he's going to keep it. You know, he wants to do a few things to it, but I'm quietly telling him, just keep with the original and don't veer off course. But it's a fascinating, fascinating house. And again, it's this whole thing about restoring and bringing back rather than tearing down, which is what happens a lot with these contractors and builders these days. You know, they see these houses and they're like, you know what, it'd be cheaper if you just knock it down and build something new. So we're really trying to help him. His name's Frank. He's a contractor from Brooklyn, and he's like real bada bing, bada boom kind of guy, you know, but he's a contractor and he loves it. It's finding these people to buy these houses it's like a conservatorship, it's trying to finding the custodians for these houses. So this is another way I can get Myron's name out there, right, is by finding a great story, giving it to a major publication, and them publishing it, and then, get this excitement around Myron's work. Because it's literally, I think, it's my favorite piece of his architecture. You can see it, you can go there, and I mean, it's an incredible piece of architecture.
June, when Myron designed a house, how did you then interpret that to do the interiors?
Myron's interiors, I saw the plans and then planned what I was going to do. And to resonate with them, you couldn't be iffy, you couldn't be weak, you had to be strong. You had to have objects and a landscape for living that resonated with the architecture and be very respectful of it, but also stand up to it.
What are some of the projects you remember working on with Myron that were particularly interesting?
Oh, okay. Let me give you a last project.
Okay.
Which was a resort in the Caribbean. Myron didn't see anything until it was done. I traveled a good number of countries, with a bulletproof car, so I could go where I wanted to go, which was not always where the driver wanted to go, with people with guns. And at one point, we had a plane come from Brazil full of the artifacts that I collected throughout Brazil. It was a small runway, and the pilot called and said, "Can I land?" And the client and I went, "Oh, yes," but we couldn't figure out how we would take off. So, but it was the kind of project that Myron loved. It was intricate. It had a resonance to what he did in my way. And that's what he loved. It was unexpected. It's for other people, but not unexpected to Myron. As far as he was concerned, it was perfect. And he would come in and he had absolutely seen nothing about it and go, wow. And that was our relationship. So that was the last project. And we had a great time doing it together.
What a wonderful partnership and marriage, really.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
Well, we will adjourn at this point. Please come up and talk to our panel and give them your comments and questions. Myron Goldfinger's legacy is really going to continue to grow over the coming years. We have to be very vigilant to keep track of all his houses so they don't fall under the bulldozer like many of them have. The time to intervene, folks, is not when the house is sold, but when the house goes vacant, much earlier. That's a time to be telling your friends and pals and putting it on social media so that we always have somebody lined up that wants to be a loving, caring owner of the house. So thank you very much for coming out today.
Kansas City native Lucy Wijnands grew up surrounded by music. She was a regular at her dad's jazz gigs as a stride piano player and got her start as a vocalist singing with him. After graduating from SUNY Purchase,
Go Panthers!
At the height of the pandemic, a career in music seemed bleak with everything shut down. Undaunted, she moved to Brooklyn and quickly won the 2021 Blues Alley Jazz Society's Ella Fitzgerald competition. Her new album is Something Awaits. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you. How are you today?
Doing great.
We're good. I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Me too. I'm excited.
You got your start singing with your dad. When did that start?
I did. Well, it sort of started when I was a baby. He would bring me and my sister to his gigs, and he would prop me up on his lap when he would play the piano, and that's sort of how I got exposed early on to jazz music. And then, I must have been 13 or so when a friend of mine said, "Hey, I think you can sing." And I was like, okay, well, my dad has this regular gig and I'm going to go down there and bring all my friends and sing and pretend I'm a star. And
friends help that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how that started with my dad. And I kind of just crashed his gigs and learned.
What is stride piano? I'm sort of familiar with it, but help me out.
Stride piano refers to the motion of the left hand striding back and forth.
Okay.
So my dad, he plays the bass note and then he strides up the piano with the same hand and plays a chord. I mean, and I'm sure he would describe it differently, but yeah, it just refers to the striding motion in the left hand. So
Okay.
it's basically like acting as his own bass player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He must know Judy Carmichael, who's also a famous stride piano player.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he gets a lot of his influence through the greats like Fats Waller and Art Tatum and Errol Garner. He's sort of a master at all kinds of stride.
One of your influences has been Ella Fitzgerald.
Mm-hmm.
When did you discover her, and how has she shaped your music?
I discovered her very early on. I was lucky to grow up in a very musical house. But when I moved to New York at the age of 14 or so, I started taking voice lessons from a very well-renowned jazz vocalist here. Her name is Ann Phillips. And she said, you just need to listen to the greats. And I started listening to Ella Fitzgerald and transcribing her and singing along with her around the age of 13 or 14. And I've always been listening to her and Sarah Vaughan. So, I mean, they're both my favorites. But Ella is just, I think she's the best.
And you won the Blues Alley Ella Fitzgerald competition 2 years ago.
I did, and I was also the Ella Fitzgerald Scholar at SUNY Purchase, and so just a few years later, I won the vocal competition. So yeah, Ella is a big influence in my life.
So any competition named after Ella, we should put you into.
Yeah.
Exactly, and hopefully I'll win.
This first song, Always and Forever, did you write that?
I did. I wrote the lyrics. My dad wrote the music a few years back, and it was actually the first lyric that I ever wrote. So I brought it to my band in Brooklyn, and I said, we need to do this and put it on the album. And yeah, and that's why it's first, and it's my favorite one on the album, I think. And I think everybody here loves the song, everybody in New York. It's my goal to make it a jazz standard.
Here's Lucy with Always and Forever.
Shine every time I see your eyes, always and forever. Through the bad times we can weather, rain or shine. As long as we've got you and I'm satisfied. And when your arms are wrapped around mine, I know the sun always shines, just 'cause you're always in my life. Always and forever, loving you makes things better. I'm in heaven. I love you so, with all my heart, body and soul. That bloom in the spring. You're the sun in the daytime, moon in the nighttime. You are the brightest star that is shining. Always and forever, loving you makes so much better. I'm in heaven, here to stay, here to stay.
Well, that should be a jazz classic.
Yeah.
I think so.
That was your first song?
Yes.
Dang.
That's fantastic.
I mean, I think it's one of my dad's masterpieces. I mean, I really do think it's a classic.
The pandemic, Lucy, was really huge for you, and it inspired this first album. How did all that come together?
Oh, boy. The pandemic hit during my senior year of college. I mean, I thought my singing career was over before it started. It really freaked me out, like it did for a lot of people. And with no venues to perform in, I felt lost as an artist. And, I had recorded on other people's albums and other projects, but I wanted to do something of my own and document this time period. So I met this band in Brooklyn in the pandemic, and I basically started singing with them in this underground jazz club called Wilson Live. And it became sort of this creative playground for me, and everything sort of just came together. And I recorded with them, and that's how that happened. It was a beautiful thing.
You're also a painter, not a house painter, but an artist-type painter. And you want to work that into your music. So how do you get painting and music to come together?
Well, I'm still figuring that out. I mean, I think they're very connected anyway. I mean, when the pandemic hit, I wasn't singing, so that's when I started painting. It just became this creative release. I mean, I think they're sort of a similar release and a similar form of expression. I just recorded a new project with my dad, and I'm excited to make my own artwork for that. So yeah, I'm still figuring it out and how they weave together. But I think making art means being lost and found at the same time, and that's what painting is for me. It's working out that feeling of being lost and then finding yourself, and that's what the album's all about.
Here's Lucy with another song from the album, Something Awaits, and this song is called Start All Over Again.
He gave a diamond ring, and then he turned away without saying a thing. Slow down, don't be afraid, 'cause it's all over now. Just hear what I say. Well, it's all right, and that's why I sing this song. Sometimes in a life, baby, you're gonna keep on getting it wrong. No need to mend. Listen up, my friend. You just start all over again. 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 He made a promise to you. He said we'll go away, buy a home or two. But now you've nowhere to go, because he left it all for you to find on your own. Well, it's all right, and that's why I sing this song. Sometimes in a life, baby, you're gonna keep on getting it wrong. No need to mend. Listen up, my friend. You just start all over again. No need to mend. Listen up, my friend. You just start all over again.
I like this stuff.
Yeah. It has kind of a little Western swing to it, too.
A little bit.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly Omer Avital, the bass player and co-producer of this record. This is his song that I wrote the words to. He came to me and he's like, I'm hearing something kind of Western, country Western. And I'm like, well, I've got you. And this story just came into my head, and yeah.
Nice little horn charts there, too.
Yeah. Yeah, those are his arrangements. I love it.
You can hear more of Lucy's music and see her new album at lucywijnands.com, and that's spelled Lucywij, the J is silent, Nands.com. Thanks for joining us, Lucy. This was delightful.
Thank you both. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle Square Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Malibu, Toronto, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs.
Visit USModernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Kelly Policelli handles guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.